Hey everyone, my name is Sapphire Sandalo. I am so excited to be here. Thank you again, Ryan and Jason, for having me be a part of this virtual expo. This is really cool, and I'm really excited to see everyone else's talks and to interact with all of you. So, welcome to my talk entitled "How to Have a Supernatural Experience." So, I would like to ask all of you in the chat first, how many of you here have had an experience that you would consider paranormal or supernatural in nature? Cool. This is pre-recorded, so I have no idea if you were even writing in the chat or not. And now I want to ask how many of you in here have never had an experience like that, but have always wanted one? This is me pretending to read the chat. Cool, awesome. Well, hopefully people have responded to, or hopefully most of you have responded to that second question, because that's what this talk is going to be about. So I am a storyteller. I tell stories for a living via podcasts and YouTube videos. And, they're mostly paranormal or supernatural in nature. And because I share so many other people's stories, people always ask me, well, you must have some crazy personal stories too, right? And for the longest time, my answer to that has always been no, mainly because, I've heard everything. And to me, I've never had anything on that level. I've never seen an apparition. I've never felt, I've never felt or seen anything. And so I was always under, the impression that I just was not the type of person to have these types of experiences. But the more that I learn about what is paranormal and what is supernatural and what the spirit realm really is, I came to the realization that I actually have had a couple experiences. They're nothing like these stories that I share on my shows, but I have had them. And once I changed my perception of what is supernatural, then I started to see it in my everyday life. And my life has changed, not to sound super dramatic or anything. So I want to tell you that you don't need to seek out haunted places to experience something extraordinary, because it's already happening within all of us. So in this talk, I'm going to explain what I mean by that and show you how I've been able to experience the supernatural, and also offer you tips on how you can too. And if you've already had supernatural experiences, well, congratulations, it's great for you. But maybe this talk can help you have even more. So before we move on any further, obviously, probably should talk about what a supernatural experience is. What does that mean, right? It is an event that cannot be explained by nature or science and is assumed to come from beyond or to originate from otherworldly forces. I pulled that off somewhere on the internet. So simply put, it just means it is something that cannot be explained, no matter how hard we try, or definitively explained. We live in a time of smartphones and Google, and a lot of what we used to think as paranormal and supernatural has been debunked through science. But there are still so many things that we do not know for sure. It's crazy when we think about everything that we do know compared to what people knew only 100 or so years ago. We're learning so much every century. And so, what we think to be true today, our world is not going to be the same in 100 years. And so, speaking of the future, predicting the future accurately would be considered a supernatural event, right? And do any of you in the chat believe that people can predict the future? You can just say yes or no in the chat. I'm curious. Again, no idea what you're typing, but so I don't claim to be a psychic or a medium in any way, but there have been a few occasions where I have accurately predicted the future. In 2012, I was working at FITM, which is this fashion school in downtown LA. And I was a graphic designer and video editor. And I didn't hate the job, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do. So that was to work in the animation industry. That's what I went to school for. So I sort of felt like I had given up on the idea of ever working in an actual studio. And I figured it was something that would happen years later, not for someone who'd only been out of film school for a couple of years. And that was sort of like my mindset. I was just like, okay, it's not going to happen. And then my friend, who knew that I wanted to work in animation, he connected me with this guy that he knew who was also trying to get into that industry. And I remember at first I really resisted this meeting. I'm a super introvert, so like I don't want to meet new people unless I really have to. And so, but my friend, he just kept pushing me to meet with this guy. I was like, what are we going to talk about? Like how we both are not in our dream career. But I caved and I ended up meeting with him. And we ended up talking for like 5 or more hours. Like we even had to relocate from the bar that we were at to go to a 24-hour diner. Like that's how long we were talking. And in our conversation, he told me about these young artists who were our age. And they were working as visual development artists and storyboard artists at Disney. And I remember thinking, wow, so it is possible for someone my age to have a dream job. And I just remember my mindset just totally changed in that moment. He had also told me about these drawing workshops, and so I signed up for them. And at the time, I was also learning about vision boards. Honestly, every time I've made a vision board, like my life has changed. Feel free to email me after this and we can talk about vision boards. After I finished my board and I looked at my calendar and I was like, okay, I need to make a deadline for myself. And I was just looking at the dates. And I remember I zeroed in on this one day, April 22nd, 2013. And it was only a couple months away at the time. And I remember thinking, that's pretty bold of me to think that it'll happen this soon, like within a couple of months. But I was like, no. This is the day that I'm going to finally have my dream job. So I circled it and I wrote, you're going to have a new job by then. And so a couple months passed by. And then I was hired on my very first TV series. It was a new Adult Swim show. And my start date was April 22nd, 2013. So I know some of you are probably thinking, okay, that's not predicting the future. You just happened to pick the right date. It was just a coincidence, right? But a lot of things had to happen in order for me to pick that date and for that exact date to be the right one, right? Like my friend connecting me with that guy, us meeting up, me having this inspiration, me picking that date, and also the studio picking that day to be the start date. Was it just a random date? Maybe. But what is random? Like what does that mean when something's random, right? When people think of random, you usually think that it is lacking in meaning, like there is no significance. But there's this quote that I really like from this philosopher named Baruch Spinoza. No idea if I said that right. They said, nothing in nature is random. A thing appears random only through the incompleteness of our knowledge. I really like that because it's sort of looking at random in a totally different way. It's not lacking in meaning. We just don't know what the meaning is yet. So when I think back on that date, and I try to think like, okay, why did I pick that? Like what was going on in my mind at the time to make me pick that exact date? And for me, the answer is my intuition. My intuition is what led me to pick that date. So I want to ask the chat, what is intuition to you? You just say like a couple words or like phrases or whatever. Again, no idea if you're typing. So our intuition is really just this is how mysterious intuition is, because I'm even right now having a hard time explaining it. But the way that we refer to it changes. It varies from culture to culture and religion to religion, right? Some people, may call it a gut feeling or a hunch. Some people call it God or the universe. It's when a thought comes into your head, or when you have a bad feeling about someone, if you feel compelled to do or not do something. We use our intuition every single day, and we don't even fully understand what it is and where it comes from. Intuition is in itself a supernatural phenomena because we do not fully understand it. And so I just want to take a moment to let that sink in, because I believe that is so beautiful that we all have this built-in GPS within us. It keeps us safe. It guides us in the right direction. So for the rest of this talk, I'd like to share with you what my definition of my intuition is. And to me, intuition is the spirits of our ancestors. And this is a concept that I learned from Lynn Pacificar, who is a Filipino shaman, and she's amazing, and I just wanted to shout her out. If you want, visit her website. I'm going to put it right here. Basically, indigenous Filipinos believed that the spirit realm is all around us. So the spirit realm is where our deceased relatives reside. And the way that they communicate with us is through our intuition and our inner voice. So all of their knowledge and wisdom is literally floating around us at all times. So when you get those thoughts or feelings, that's your ancestors speaking to you. At least that's like how I see it. And these signs can be very subtle. So if you're not paying attention, then you'll miss them. So, if you look back at the story I just told, my friend texted me around the time where I was sort of settling in my career. I was thinking, okay, maybe I should give up on animation for now because it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And, I really had no interest in meeting that guy, but my friend was just really insistent. And so when I look back on that, I wonder, now with my new understanding of what my intuition is, I wonder, did my ancestors have a role in orchestrating all of that to happen? So I have another story where I sort of predicted the future again, but in a different way. And to me, this is a much more clear intervention of the spirits of my ancestors. So I hope it all makes sense after my story. So in 2011, I was hired at a startup, and my friend who got me the job was introducing me to everyone in the office. And we stopped at this desk where a man was sitting with his back turned. And my friend said, "This is Elliot. You're going to be working with him." And when Elliot turned around, this thought came to my head clear as day. This man is going to be very important in your life. And I remember just standing there kind of like, why did that thought just come to my head? I literally just met this person. And so 7 years after that moment, I married Elliot. Yeah, so at the time that happened, I didn't think, oh wow, my ancestors are talking to me. No, I just felt like I was having this really random, clear thought. And it was so weird that I remembered it all these years. And at the time, I just didn't know what to call it. And again, there's that word random, right? At the time, it felt very random. But now looking back, there is a meaning to it. The meaning was, oh, you're going to marry this guy. When I look at the relationship I've had with my husband over the years, it was very up and down throughout, like most are. But I always thought back to that moment when I met him. It's sort of like this confirmation that, hang in there, everything is going to work out. So I want to take a second to have you think about your own lives. Have you had similar instances like this where something really random happened and then you didn't understand what it meant until later? Or maybe it's something random. Excuse me, my voice cracked. Maybe something random happened to you recently and you haven't learned the meaning of it yet. So I want to tell one more story. It's a little bit longer, so buckle in, buckle up, whatever. So this is a story about how I believe I have been communicating with my ancestors over the past year. So a little bit of background on me. I grew up never really caring about old people. I just always felt really uncomfortable around them because I just never knew what to say. I was little and I'm like, I have nothing in common with these old people. Like, that's just how I thought as a kid. I never had any interest in knowing about our family history. Never had any interest in learning about Filipino history or like history in general. Like, history just was the most boring topic to me. I had no interest for it. But what I was interested in was paranormal stories and ghost stories. And my grandpa had so many. He has encountered witches and fairies and giants and classic ghosts, like anything you name it, he's seen it. And so when I was about like 9 or 10, my grandma and my grandpa were over for dinner, and the topic of those stories came up. And so I got my tape recorder, and then I recorded my grandpa telling some of his stories. So I'm going to play a little clip for you now.
So it was clear, very clear. The moon is shining. That's right. But then all of a sudden, I hear this sound. It's so piercing.
So these stories were what inspired me to create a web series a couple years ago called Something Scary, where I told ghost stories from around the world. And I was doing it for a company. I wasn't doing it independently. And after a couple of years, I was just feeling super burnt out, to the point where I wasn't even sure if I liked ghost stories anymore. And that was a terrible feeling, to go from being obsessed with something to not wanting anything to do with it. So on the side, I was like, okay, I need something to reignite that spark, that creative spark in me, right? So I was working on this pitch for a TV show idea on the side, and I was researching Filipino ghosts because I knew that I wanted to showcase the folklore and the urban legends of the Philippines, because it's just something that we haven't really seen in entertainment. And in this research, what started off as just knowing about the ghosts and the monsters, I ended up going down this path of learning about Filipino history. And I started making these connections that I never had before. I realized that my desire to learn about the paranormal and the spiritual world is literally in my blood. So what I mean by that, indigenous Filipinos were animistic. So that means that they believed everything has a spirit and that there are spirit realms. Spirit realms are parallel to our physical realm, but they are invisible to most people. And these stories and these beliefs are built into our DNA. So my ancestors, like way back, they had such a deep connection with the spirit world. Indigenous Filipinos practiced magic and interacted with the spirit world all the time, and they had rituals, and it was the first time that I really made that connection of my love for this type of stuff is because of centuries and centuries of my ancestors actually living it. So after learning about the horrors of colonization that the Philippines endured for like 500 years, it no longer felt right for me to continue working for this company that owned Something Scary and all of my ideas and my work. So I was compelled to quit my job. Didn't really have much of a plan, but I had this feeling, that nagging feeling, that I needed to leave this job. So I became an independent creator, and I created a podcast called Stories with Sapphire. So that's what I work on now. And I I wanted to incorporate a lot of Filipino stories and history. So I would always text my mom, asking her how to pronounce certain words. And once I launched the show, she listened to the episodes every single week, and she's like my biggest fan. She like shares the episodes with all of our family members, and I'm sure people are so annoyed by it now, but like she loves these stories too, and I'm pretty sure I inherited that from her. And she also introduced me to a lot of stories in my family history that I didn't know. She had asked me if I knew the story of how my great-grandpa's bones were recovered in World War II. And I was like, what? Like I had always known that my great-grandfather was killed in World War II, but I had no knowledge of the surrounding details of that. And I had never had an interest in knowing before, but now I was like, yeah, tell me about this story. So I have to tell you the story because it's so cool. And then I became obsessed with learning more about my great-grandparents. And then my mom told me that she had my great-grandmother's journal. Like years ago, one of her cousins had like typed it up and given it to all of the cousins, and I never had an interest in reading it. And I was like, oh my God, send me that journal, please. And so she literally has been emailing me page by page this journal so that I could read it. Okay, so how does any of this mean that I was communicating with my deceased ancestors? My journey from being an apathetic Filipino American to the person I am today was a long but organic one, and I believe that it was orchestrated by my ancestors through my intuition. So what makes me so sure that this was my ancestors speaking to me? Well, a couple months ago, I could have never imagined being as close to my mom as I am now. We just did not have a communicative relationship. It was just very tense. And now we text all the time. She shares my podcast with her family. She's always trying to find people for my show. We bond over the supernatural now. And I would have never, ever pictured this bringing us together. And even a year ago, I had zero interest in learning about the history of the Philippines or what my great-grandparents' lives were like. And I honestly feel like a totally different person now. And in Filipino culture, family is everything. And as a second-generation Filipino American, my relationship with my family has always had some cultural and generational tension. That's part of the reason why me and my mom never really got along. But I believe that the spirits of my ancestors were taking note of that. They saw that I just kept getting further and further away from my family history and my ancestry. And so they orchestrated this long thing to guide me to find the passion to learn about their stories and bring us all together. So the way that I see it, spirits are all around us, and they communicate with us through our intuition, which we all have. So when you pay attention to your intuition, you are communicating with the dead. You don't need a Ouija board or spirit box or anything. We're doing it all the time. I know that might seem like a super stretch to some of you, but that's okay. If that doesn't vibe with you, that's fine. So if listening to our intuition is how we communicate with the dead, then I want to close this talk by giving some advice on how you can enhance your intuition and make it speak to you a little bit louder. So this is your homework. So these are lessons and tips that I have learned from all of the people I've spoken to over the years, from all of the stories I've gathered, just little bits of advice from very knowledgeable people. So the first thing I want to say is take a week to view your intuition as the spirit of your ancestors. So what that means is, if a thought pops into your head, contemplate for a second on why you thought that, and, think if maybe somebody might be trying to contact you. Also, just notice seemingly small psychic moments, no matter how insignificant they may feel or seem. It's something as simple as knowing the phone is about to ring. Those little moments happen to us all of the time. And so really pay attention to those and don't just write them off as insignificant anymore. And so if you're going to be viewing your intuition as the spirits of your ancestors, then you should know who your ancestors are, right? So research your ancestry, learn about your family history, ask your parents, ask your grandparents if they're still around. You might find the origin of why you're interested in the paranormal, like how I did. You might learn that you have this magical heritage that you didn't know about, and it will enlighten you in so many ways. Also, meditate. We're all in quarantine, and this is the perfect time to do this type of reflective work. Set aside just half an hour every day to calm your mind. It is scientifically proven that regular meditation can alter your brain in a lot of positive ways, and it makes you more empathetic. And that's another step toward becoming more intuitive, because being empathetic is the ability to intuit how others feel. The next thing is, don't only use TV shows and movies to frame your knowledge of what is supernatural. Our ancestors long ago had a far deeper connection with the spirit realm on a daily basis. And we live in an increasingly rational world where we're not taught to listen to our intuitive mind as much. Because we don't have proper education of the spirit realm, society's knowledge of spirits is formed by entertainment. Movies and TV shows tend to rely on the sensational stuff just because it makes for better entertainment, but it leaves out the subtle things. And the subtle things are the stuff that I talked about here today. Today, we're often asked, do you believe in ghosts? But to me, it's not a matter of whether you believe in them or not. The question is, do you understand what a ghost is? That if it tried to communicate with you, would you even know? I believe the ghosts of my ancestors visited me on the day I met my husband. We communicate with ghosts all the time, but it doesn't look like what you see on TV. And finally, reframe the way you think about the world. There's a reason why a lot of us are losing our minds in lockdown, because we can't see people physically. And that's because when you spend physical time with friends and family, that is a healing practice. That is a healing ritual. We aren't receiving that same healing at the same level as we used to over a Zoom call. So next time you're able to physically see people, picture it as a healing ritual. Pay attention to how your mind and body feels before and after. Your energy is changed, and that is literally what magic is. Another thing I'd love for you to think about is if you look at your hand, when you zoom far into your hand down to the atomic level, the distance between two atoms in your hand is astronomical. Now, if you zoom back out to our world, you look at our distance to the sun and the moon and the 2 trillion galaxies in our observable universe. We don't often think of ourselves as microscopic, but what if our planet is an atom? All the planets are atoms. All the galaxies are just atoms making a giant hand that we cannot see. And we are all connected in a way that we can't even begin to fathom. When you start to view the world from a curious and magical point of view, the world becomes more magical. It opens you up to even more experiences. I used to be so frustrated that I'd never seen an apparition, and I used to do all of these third eye opening meditations to try and open up that sense. I was trying so hard. And once I stopped trying, and once I understood that the supernatural was far more complex than just seeing an apparition, that's when I began to have actual supernatural experiences. I want you to remember that we are supernatural beings filled with unexplainable things. So, thanks for joining me. My podcast, Stories with Sapphire, is basically a version of this talk where I'm learning about spirituality and sharing what I've learned. I interview knowledgeable people as well as people who have experienced unexplainable things. You can subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find all the info you need at storieswithsapphire.com. Thank you again so much for having me. I hope you had fun and have a great rest of your expo time.